slap me with her and I wouldn't run down with it. Okay. What's going on, Chris?
You name it, it's happening.
I name it, it's happening.
I said, you name it, it's happening. Pick something. That's probably what's happening. What's going on with you? Nothing? Wow, I don't think we can be more extreme in the opposite direction. Me, everything. You, nothing.
Yeah, well, you know.
But that's what.
Either that or I'm in the hospital, so take your pick. I'd rather have nothing than hospital.
Yeah, that's nothing means no stress, nothing you gotta deal with. For me, it's always back and forth. It's either something a lot or nothing at all.
Yeah, well, that's me too. I'm either in the hospital or I'm home.
Or here.
Or, you know. Yeah, or the doctor's office. Because this office I go. I go to the doctor once a month and I go here. That's it. I don't go anywhere else. Don't go shopping. Don't go to the mall. Don't go to the store.
Pharmacy.
Don't do nothing. That's why I dress up so much.
That's all right. Sometimes it's nice to just be at home, and sometimes it's nice to be with you.
It's nice to get out of the house. It's really nice. I walk out, we get out of the house and I drive down the street and I go, oh, let me go out. I've been there for 5 years. Okay.
I understand that.
So I stop asking.
Do you ever like just go outside, sit on the front porch or something?
I've got a swing out there that I could.
That's good.
I used to. I haven't done it in a while. Hello. I'm good.
Hey Jerry, how are you doing?
Just walking out there with the crutches is a pain in the rear. There's no railing around the porch, so.
Sometimes it's just nice to just get outside, feel the fresh air.
Yeah.
I do this sometimes. I'll just get up.
That's good. I used to do that. I used to sit out there on the porch swing at night and watch the sunset and wait for the bats to come out. And you can hear them. You can't see them, but you can hear them. No, it is bad. Oh, you have cicadas. Well, we have cicadas too, but the bats are every night. Every night.
Oh, Elena and Millie?
What's the start here in this game?
Elena's sister. She's got hair kind of long and under. Well, it's not long, it's still here. It's in the last 2 Sundays, so we got a picture.
The only thing that the ones that come in the winter, you don't have to worry about that for a while.
Oh. Lee and Danny. Your fingers getting tired?
Especially since they don't work good anymore. Tried to tell him Kevin still makes it cook.
I didn't know I said that.
quiet in there.
They're gonna be real quiet in there.
They're gonna be very quiet.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Before we begin class this morning, Jeff, would you start us off with the word prayer?
Father, our Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for many blessings in this life. We thank you for this opportunity this morning we have to come here and study the Lord. Lord, we pray that Mary has a great recollection of things he wants to bring forth. And we as listeners listen with an open heart. Take your word, light to our hearts. God, God, direct us. Forgive us our sins. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Okay, we have moved into Exodus chapter 29 now. And if we want to know what chapter 29 is about, all we got to do is look at the first verse. God tells Moses, "This is what you shall do to hallow them," speaking of Aaron and his sons, "for minister to me as priests." So that's what we're going to be talking about here in chapter 29. What they were to do to hallow them so they could be priests in God's eyes. We see here that they were together. Moses, this is God, as we're reading this in 29, this is God speaking to Moses. Moses is up on Mount Sinai. God is speaking to Moses and telling him what he wants done. And he tells Moses to gather a bull and 2 rams without blemish. He was to get unleavened bread, unleavened cakes mixed with oil, unleavened wafers anointed with oil, made from wheat flour. He was to put the bread into a basket. So they were to gather a bull, 2 rams, and a basket of unleavened bread. Then bring Aaron and his sons to the door of the tabernacle, wash them, put the high priest's garments on Aaron, and anoint his head with oil. And he was to dress Aaron's sons and anoint them with oil. Next, they were to bring a bull to the door of the tabernacle and kill the bull, take some of the blood and put it on the horns of the altar, and pour the rest at the base of the altar. And then he was to take certain organs and burn them on the altar, and the rest of the bull was burned outside the camp. That was the sin offering. And then he was to take one of the rams, kill the ram, and sprinkle the blood all around on the altar, cut the ram up and burn the whole ram on the altar. This was the burnt offering. And we discussed all this on Wednesday. So that was just a quick review. Are there any questions on any of this so far up to this point in this chapter? Most of it's pretty straightforward, so we're not gonna be spending a lot of time on some of this stuff, but, Chris and I get ideas from each other. Chris is up here teaching class on Wednesday, and I'm sitting there writing notes. He's giving me ideas, and I see him doing the same thing. When I'm up here, he gets to write and have ideas. So when Chris was up here Wednesday talking about the things that we just talked about, I had some things that popped in my head, and I want to discuss this morning. So let's begin this morning by reading Exodus chapter 29 and verse 10. And as a brief review, what I did was review basically verses 1 through 18, but there's a few things I want to discuss here. So let's read this morning Exodus 29 and verse 10. And Carl, would you read that?
And thou shalt cause a bullock to be brought before the tabernacle of the congregation, and Aaron and his sons shall put their hands upon the head of the bullock.
Okay, now this is after they've gathered everything together, and Aaron and his sons have all been dressed, and Aaron and his sons have been washed and anointed, and then they bring the bull to the door of the tabernacle. And what was Aaron and his sons supposed to do? Put their hands on the head of the bull. Thought that was interesting. We read about this in verse 15 when we get into them offering the rams. In verse 15, the first ram, what did they do? They put their hands on the head of the bull. And in verse 19, the second ram, again the same thing. Aaron and his sons shall put their hands on the head of the ram. Yes, Jerry?
What's the significance of that?
Well, that's what we're getting ready to talk about. Patience, Jerry.
All right.
No. Yeah, there's a lot of things we see that's symbolic here, right? There's a lot of things that we're reading about right now are symbolic, as we've already brought up, of heaven, right? That's brought up in the book of Hebrews. Some of the old things in the old law was symbolic for heaven, how different things happen. Well, there's a lot of symbolism in a lot of this stuff. And we see that here too. But let's look at, why do you think Aaron and his sons needed to put their hands on the head of these animals? Any guesses, Katie?
They didn't own any land or animals or fields, and everything they had was given to them, so maybe they had to claim it as theirs.
Well, they did have animals. They had animals of their own when they left Egypt, so, but at this point they definitely don't have any land or anything, but I think there's a different idea here, but anybody else want to make any guesses? Go ahead, Merwin.
Well, because I think possibly because there's a lot of references to people laying their hands on things as part of a cleaning or a cleansing, a blessing, whatever. If it's possible that that was the reason, is to acknowledge that this was the sacrifice.
And that's definitely possible. And the answer is, I don't know. But there is, we're going to get into, we got some other ideas. Now, we do know there's this, on the Day of Atonement, it tells us exactly why Aaron did what he did. So I get that idea maybe with this here too, but we're going to get to that. It doesn't specifically say here why. I do know later on the Day of Atonement it tells us why. But go ahead, Carl.
You got to remember, these are instructions from God. He said it to tell them how to do and to please Him. We can't know the mind of God to give the reasons unless He tells us. But we got to keep in mind that when they get to these goats, it's different than it was with this bullock. But that's the way God wanted it to be done, and He's instructed Moses. So, because if they don't do it the way He said, they'll die.
And that's
We've already read that.
That's a good reason, isn't it? Well, that's where I was leading. We don't know for sure why, but when it comes right down to it, because God said so, that's why.
That's why you do it, yeah.
Just the reason that we follow the New Testament law It's because God says so, that's why. But, I mean, we see reasons for it. We see intelligence and wisdom in God's word, and we sometimes want to know why, but the bottom line is because God tells us to. Tina, you had a comment?
The one thing that came to my mind was the bull has got big horns. You put your hands on his head's not gonna move when you kill him.
There's a lot of different possibilities, but let's turn to Leviticus. And it doesn't hurt us to discuss maybe why. We're not questioning God. It just gets thoughts in our head. But yeah, bottom line is, God said it, and that's the way it had to be done, period. So, just like God tells us in the New Testament, he tells us to sing. Doesn't tell us to play, he tells us to sing. Why? It's because that's the way God wanted it. So yeah, we might wonder why, but we don't question it. We do what he says. But it doesn't hurt sometimes to think about why he did certain things. It might help us to understand why and do things better in our own mind. He did this because of this, and it helps us maybe sometimes to understand, but I don't ever want to question God. That's not the idea here. Go ahead, Carl.
We studied in the Corinthian letter that the wise people of the world think we're stupid from what we do, but it said that God chose preaching the word, obedience to it, to be saved, and they think we're crazy for doing it. But that's the way God wanted it, and that's the way it is. We can't change that. But people around us think, yeah, we're a bunch of crazy people because we believe what God said.
Right. No doubt about that. Let's go ahead and read from Leviticus chapter 1, talking about these, them putting their head on Aaron and the sons putting their hands on the head of the bull. We're going to read verses 3 and 4 here. Now, this is not the same offering that we're talking about. The offering we're talking about in Exodus 29 was just for Aaron and the priests. This is something different, but we still get an idea here. And this offering we're going to be reading about here in verses 3 and 4 is not talking to priests. When we read this, this is talking to the Israelites themselves. This is their responsibilities. We read, as we continue reading, you're going to see responsibilities of priests. But in verses 3 and 4, we're talking about an Israelite. So Leviticus 1, verses 3 and 4. Katie, would you read that?
If his offering is a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own free will at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord. Then he shall put his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him.
Okay, if an Israelite wants to make a burnt offering, again, this is not talking to priests here, is it? It's talking about each Israelite. They want to make a burnt offering. They were to offer it it should be a male without blemish. It is to be of its own free will. And again here in verse 4, an Israelite themselves was to put their hands on the head of the burnt offering. And why it tells us a little bit of why right here. That's the same thing we've been saying. And it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. So it's like he's putting his hands on the head of that bull and saying, God, would you accept this on my behalf? So that's kind of the way I read this in these verses, what it's saying. Now, this is not the priests. This is just an Israelite. Even they were instructed to put their hands on the head of the bull here. I found that interesting, as Aaron and his sons are for their offering to be priests. Yes, go ahead.
In addition to them taking the place of the animal, in Leviticus 16, verse 21, Aaron shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat. This is the scapegoat that they send out from the congregation, and confess over it all the iniquities of the sons of Israel and their transgressions in regard for their sin, and shall lay them on the head of the goat and send it out of the wilderness. And the goat shall bear on itself all the iniquities to an isolated land, and he shall send it out into the wilderness. This is a transfer of the Israelites' sin by the laying on of hands on the head of the goat, or the scapegoat. We see that with the sin offering as well, and
we're gonna read a few verses in Leviticus 16 in just here in a few moments, absolutely.
Sorry.
Yes, that was good scripture to talk to, refer to. So, here an Israelite is instructed in a burnt offering, put your head on the head of this bull. Let's flip over a couple of chapters here to chapter 4. We're going to read verses 14 and 15. Leviticus 4, verses 14 and 15. But what we're reading about here is God's instructions. If the Israelites, the congregation, all of them, the whole, if they sinned unintentionally, something they didn't know was a sin and they did it, and they weren't aware of it, and they become aware of it, this is what they were to do. I found this interesting too. So let's read Leviticus chapter 4, verses 14 and 15. And Stacy, would you read that?
When the sin which they have committed becomes known, then the assembly shall offer a young bull for the sin, and bring it before the tabernacle of meeting. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord. Then the bull shall be killed before the Lord.
So here the whole congregation has sinned unintentionally, something they didn't know about. And what were they told to do? All the elders of the Israelites were to get there, and they were to all put their hands on the head of the bull before they offered it. So this isn't something new or something different. This was something God wanted done. So yeah, and it does give the idea of transference, which we're going to read in Leviticus 16 here in just a moment. But we know in Leviticus 1 it specifically said, do this so that will be accepted in my sight and to make atonement for you. Now let's go ahead and turn to Leviticus 16.
What's that?
Leviticus 16. In Leviticus 16 here we read about the Day of Atonement. This is the day that the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, the most holy place, to make an offering for all the people's sins. And when this happened, they were to take a bull and 2 rams, as we're reading about here about the priest, a bull and 2 rams, and they were to offer the bull, and then one of the goats, I said ram, goat, but they were to offer one of the rams and the bull, and then they brought the blood of the goat inside the veil into the most holy place and sprinkled the blood of the goat on the mercy seat on the Day of Atonement. But let's go ahead now and read verses 20 to 22. This is the second goat. It was a bull and 2 goats. 1 bull and 1 goat was offered. This goat's is alive. So verses 20 to 22. Chris, would you read those?
And when he has made an end of atoning for the holy place, the tabernacle of meeting, and the altar, he shall bring the live goat. Aaron shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat, confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all the transgressions concerning all their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and shall send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a suitable man. The goat shall bear on itself all their iniquities to an uninhabited land, and he shall release the goat into the wilderness.
This goat wasn't killed, was it? Aaron was instructed to do what? He put his hands on the head of the goat, right? And what else?
Let it free.
Huh?
Let it free in the wilderness.
Well, yes, they were to do that. What were they to do other before that? Put his hands on the head of the goat and what? Well, confess.
Confess his sin.
Confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel. So in a way, God is like saying, Aaron's going to put his hands on the head of this goat, and he's going to confess all the sins that the Israelites have done that year, and basically like transfer these sins to this goat. And this is in mine it just says a live goat. There are some translations that say scapegoat. That's where we get the idea here. They're transferring our sins to this goat. And they let this goat go out in the wilderness. And their sins would go with it. It's symbolic, right? We're talking about symbolism here and a lot of this stuff. And that's what we're seeing here. So his hands on the head of that goat and confess their sins. Carl, you had another comment? Okay. So we get that idea here, and I think that's it. I'm not saying that for a fact, is we're reading these offerings for the priests, the same idea, transferring some of their issues, because this process is going on there to be sanctified, right? That's what we're reading about here. So they put their hands on the head of the bull, and I think in a way to transfer some of their mistakes onto this bull, and it was offered. Because that's exactly the idea here we're reading about in Leviticus 16. Now let's flip over to Numbers chapter 8. This is a little bit of a lengthy reading, but I thought it was interesting. Numbers chapter 8, we're going to read verses 9 through 14. And this is God telling the Israelites that he wants the Levites to serve, take care of the temple. Of course, at this point, it's the tabernacle. They're going to serve Aaron. They're going to take care of him and take care of the tabernacle. And this is some of the process that's going to happen for them to do that. So Numbers, I keep saying Leviticus, Numbers chapter 8, verses 9 through 14. And Charlie, would you read those?
And thou shalt bring the Levites before the tabernacle of the congregation. And thou shalt gather the whole assembly of the children of Israel together. And thou shalt bring the Levites before the Lord, and the children of Israel shall put their hands upon the Levites. And Aaron shall offer the Levites before the Lord for an offering of the children of Israel, that they may execute the service of the Lord. And the Levites shall lay their hands upon the heads of the bullocks, and thou shalt offer the one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering unto the Lord, to make an atonement for the Levites. And thou shalt set the Levites before Aaron and before his son, and offer them for an offering unto the Lord. Thus shalt thou separate the Levites from among the children of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine.
Again, this process for the Levites to go in and help Aaron and do what they say. Here's part of this process. First we read that the Israelites themselves, what were they to do? It says here in verse 9, gather all the congregation together in verse 9. Verse 10, bring the Levites before the Lord, and the children of Israel shall lay their hands on the Levites. So, in a way, the work they would need to do for the tabernacle as all the Israelites, they're transferring that work kind of to the way I see it, to the Levites. Put their hands on the Levites. And then for the Levites to perform their work, they were to offer offerings. And what were they to do? The Levites were now to put their hands on these bulls as they were offered, the sin offering and the burnt offering. And then they were to be, in a way, presented to the rest of the Israelites. These are the ones that's going to be taking care of the tabernacle. I found that interesting too. So this, placing their hands on the head of the bull or the goat, is not something new or unusual. This is something God wanted to be done.
My version calls it a wave offering. What is that?
Well, it's a way of presenting something, and it does mean wave means wave, right? The way I understand it, they lifted it up and like presented it, and maybe even moved it around, waved it. So they're kind of presenting. They've been dedicated and consecrated, the Levites, to do the work of the tabernacle, and now they're like presenting them to the Israelites. Here's the guys that's going to be doing the work. And we're going to see that when we get into a wave offering. We'll be talking about that some more.
Okay.
But one more verse and we'll get back to Exodus 29. Let's flip over a few chapters to Numbers chapter 27. It's a little bit different idea. here, but Numbers 27, verse 18. And what we're reading about here is Moses is turning things over to Joshua. He's already been told by God, your time's up. You're not going to go into the promised land because of what you did at Meribah. So it's time for you to let everybody know that Joshua is going to be the one taking over. So that's what we're reading about here in verse 18. So, Jerry, would you read Numbers 27, verse 18?
27:18. And the Lord said to Moses, take thee Joshua, the son of Nun, a man whom is in the spirit, and lay thy hand upon him.
As Moses now is to take Joshua and put his hands on him. That's a little different idea than what we're reading about with these bulls. But you can see this is Moses basically giving him his endorsement. He's putting his hands on him. This is the guy that's taken over for me, and he's doing it because I want him to do it. He's basically, and this is a way of endorsing. Now we talk about that in the New Testament, don't we? Don't be in a rush to lay your hands on somebody. Don't be in a rush to endorse somebody if you don't really know them. We're told that in the New Testament. But here we see Moses basically endorsing Joshua's going to be the man. So he's putting his hands on him to let the Israelites know that. So we read a lot of different things that laying hands mean. We also know laying of hands in the New Testament means they passed on miraculous ability also. So there's a lot of things involved here with these laying on and putting their hands on there, but specifically here in all these offerings that we're reading about in the Old Testament, they were to put their hands on the head of this animal. Why? Because God said so. That's why. But we see here in Leviticus 16 anyway, it was like they were transferring their sins to that animal, and then he symbolically, and they let him go in the wilderness. Go ahead, Carl.
We were studying the New Testament. The apostles gave spiritual gifts by laying their hands on these people. It's a form of giving something.
Right, absolutely. As in a way, symbolically, they were giving something to these animals here, and we're talking about this, weren't they? But a little different, but any comments on this? I just thought that was very interesting, that putting the hand on the heads of the animals. And when I got to studying, I hadn't noticed all this before. I've learned a lot of stuff here as we're going through this whole law, but Aaron and his sons were to do it, and then on a burnt offering, whoever was offering it was to do it. And if they sinned unintentionally, all the elders were to do it. And then, they put their hands on the Levites, and the Levites were to put their hands on the bull. And there was a lot of this going on. But any comments here before we move on in chapter 29? Go ahead, Charlie.
Yes, I have a thought. As the blood of bulls and goats couldn't take away sin, this animal, the scapegoat, he could have found his way back into the camp, and everyone would have known of the situation of this goat. And so it would symbolize our coming back amongst the children of Israel of their sins. Because, again, the blood of bulls and goats couldn't take them away. And the reaction to seeing this goat amongst them, what was it like?
Well, even if the goat didn't come back into camp, it still gives the idea that their sins weren't forgiven. Their sins were still there, right? And we know that's why in the Old Testament, the Day of Atonement, once a year, Aaron had to go into the most holy place to offer for the sins, but they weren't forgiven. They were pushed back for a year. So there's a lot of symbolism with all of this stuff, isn't it? This goat was sent out in the wilderness, so their sins weren't gone, but they were transferred somewhere else. The New Testament, our sins are forgiven, gone. God doesn't remember them. That's the difference in the Old and New Law. We can read all about that in the book of Hebrews. Any other comments? Go ahead, Chris.
It's always interested me that all of this didn't do a thing in reference to their sin. The sin offering didn't do a thing. The Day of Atonement did not do a thing. All of it was symbolic. And when you read Hebrews 10, it says that what these sacrifices did was Instead of taking away sin, it reminded them that they are still guilty of sin. As just all these sacrifices, it was God's message to them to let them know you're not right and something needs to be done to fix this.
But even though their sins weren't forgiven, it was something they still had to do. And when Jesus came along, that took care of all that. If they did follow the old law, then their sins were forgiven. But retroactive. Go ahead, Charlie.
Imagine if we had to do all that they did, man, and we look at what we have to do. I mean, it's nothing compared to their situation back at that time.
Oh, I hate goats. My sister has goats and I hate them.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, there's that.
Yes,
Can you imagine keeping goats in your backyard?
well, I had someone I worked with that decided he didn't want to mow his yard anymore, so he got some goats, and he had bought a brand new pickup. And one morning he came out to go to work, and the goat was up on top of his pickup. He didn't want goats anymore because it had scratched up and dented his brand new pickup, and he was not happy. Yes, so
Goats will climb on anything.
yeah, they had a lot of things they had to do, and all that they had to do, their sins weren't forgiven, and those sins didn't get forgiven until Christ came. But this is still something they had to do to be right in God's eyes. God said it, you got to do it. That's just the way it is. That was the way it was. Well, let's move on. We had some good conversation here about that. Let's reread verse 16, Exodus 29 and verse 16. And Leo, would you read that?
And you shall kill the ram, and you shall take its blood and sprinkle it all around on the altar.
Okay, now this is the first ram, and once they kill the ram, they would take the blood and sprinkle it all around on the altar itself. Now this isn't anything unusual though, is it? That's one of the reasons I want to bring it up. Let's flip back a few chapters to chapter 24. Exodus 24, we're going to read verse 6. And this is, Moses had already told the people all the words that God had told them on the mountain. He comes down and he tells the people the words. And then verse 4, he writes the words down. And then early in the morning he gets up, and what's he do? He builds an altar. And he has, doesn't say how many, he has young men offering burnt offerings and sacrificing peace offerings. In verse 6 here we read about what they did with this blood. So Exodus 24 verse 6. And Donna, would you read that?
And Moses took half the blood and put it in basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar.
So this is not what we're reading about here isn't anything new. They were to take that blood and they would sprinkle it on the altar, not around the altar. Sprinkle it all around on the altar. Let's go ahead and go back to chapter 29 now, and let's read verse 18. Exodus 29, verse 18. And Dave, would you read that?
And you shall burn the whole ram on the altar. It is a burnt offering to the Lord. It is a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord.
Okay, this phrase, burnt offering, I wanted to talk about that briefly here this morning. It's found, the Hebrew word translated burnt offering is found 288 times in the Old Testament. And it's either translated, of those 288, 286, it's either translated burnt offering or burnt sacrifice. But does anybody know what the actual word means, burnt offering? I know what the result is, but does anybody? Wow, class has gone really fast today, but the actual Hebrew word for this word that's translated burnt offering, a burnt sacrifice, means that which goes up. which does make sense, doesn't it? They get this animal, and it's a burnt offering. What do? They burn it up. So, and let's turn quickly to 1 Kings chapter 10. One of the two times that it's not translated burnt offering. 1 Kings chapter 10, we're going to read verse 5.
What was that again?
1 Kings 10, verse 5. And Joetta, would you read that?
The food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters, and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there is no more spirit in her.
This is talking about the Queen of Sheba when she came to visit Solomon, and she's seeing all these things of his, and she wanted a reason to condemn him or belittle him in a way, I guess you might say, and she's seen all this and she couldn't. But what I want to talk about here in verse 5, his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord. Went up. That's the same Hebrew word translated burnt offering the majority of the time. Went up. So just gives an idea. We know what a burnt offering is, and we're reading about it and what it was for, but the actual word, what it meant, is to me was interesting. The word burnt offering means just simply to go up. And we won't take time to read, but Ezekiel 40 verse 26, it's translated again to go up. Now back in chapter 18 here, it's a burnt offering, and Chris made reference to this on Wednesday. Who's got the King James version? The old King James. Sandy, you got? Would you read verse 18 again?
And thou shalt burn the whole lamb on the altar as a burnt offering unto the Lord. It's a sweet savor and offering made by fire unto the Lord.
Okay, this burnt offering here is described as a sweet savor, right? We're running out of time, but this isn't something unusual. We read about this in Genesis 8. What did Noah do when they finally got out of the ark? He built an altar and offered offerings to the Lord. That's exactly right. And how was that described? It's described as a sweet savor. God was pleased with that. And he said, I will never, ever again destroy the world by water.
He didn't like a barbecue.
So, but the word sweet means pleasing, okay? A pleasing savor. Does anybody know what the word savor means?
Taste.
No.
Aroma.
It means smell. Yeah, literally it means smell. So the New King James translates this as sweet aroma, or a pleasing aroma. So Chris's question was this on Wednesday. Does that mean God actually smelled this ram getting burnt up and thought, well, that smells good? Is that what that means? No, it's symbolic again. That's what we've been talking about. Right? There's a lot of symbolism here, isn't there? Go ahead, Merwin.
I think it's like the first question they asked, you don't know.
Well, yes, actually, we do know what it means. Sweet savor, no, literally, it means a pleasant smell. But it represents something, doesn't it? It's something that's pleasing to God. And that's what Chris said on Wednesday. When you read about this, it's something that made God happy. Why would that make God happy?
Obedience makes me happy.
Exactly. They were doing what God told them to do. That pleased him. Now, I'm not sure why, and again, I don't want to speculate, but we read this phrase, the majority of the time it's used, sweet savor, it has to do with offerings, specifically burnt offerings, a sweet savor. So we see some of this language is symbolic, but it's for us, not for God, isn't it? This was something the Israelites would understand. A sweet savor, something pleasant to smell that made them happy. Well, this offering that they did according to the way God told them to made God happy. So this is symbolic. It doesn't mean he actually, it smells good. No, this is something that they did according to his word, and that made him happy. It was pleasing in his sight. So when we read about this, and we're going to read a lot, sweet savor means something pleasing in God's sight. Let's look at I got right to where Chris did and didn't get through. If you have a chance, if you read Ephesians 5 verses 1 and 2, it talks about what we are to do is to be a sweet savor. Sacrifices we are to give. The New Testament. And specifically in Philippians 4 verse 18, these sacrifices were offer as priests. Were to be acceptable to the Lord, pleasing in his sight. That's the idea we're talking about when we're talking about sweet savor. So Chris will pick up here wherever he sees fit on Wednesday evening, but thanks for your time and your attention.